Hey, curious minds, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a really interesting idea. It might just change how you look at decisions, especially, when money's involved. We're going to untangle the difference between being rational and being reasonable. Our sources for this deep dive include some truly thought-provoking insights, particularly from a piece that, well, it boldly states you're not a spreadsheet, but actually a screwed-up emotional person. Which is honestly a pretty refreshing take. It gets right to the heart of making choices we can actually stick with.
Yeah, and that's really our mission today. To unpack why aiming for reasonable might actually be, well, a far more effective strategy than just chasing pure cold rationality. We'll explore how this distinction plays out in some really surprising ways. Things like Nobel Prize-winning medical breakthroughs right through to the everyday details of your personal finances. What's really fascinating here is just how much common wisdom gets sort of turned on its head when we look beyond the purely logical.
Okay, let's unpack this. And to really get it, we need to start with a story. It sounds almost unbelievable, actually, a medical history lesson.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Julius Wagner Jauregg. He was a 19th century psychiatrist. Now, this guy, he had this incredible knack for seeing patterns where others just saw chaos. What seemed crazy to some, he saw as bold. His specialty was severe neurosyphilis, which back then was basically a fatal diagnosis, no known cure. But he started noticing something odd. Patients with syphilis sometimes recovered if they also got really high, prolonged fevers from something else, like an unrelated infection. He had this hunch, an idea that had been, floating around for centuries, that fevers somehow help the body fight infection.
Right. So that raised a big question for him. Could fever actually be a treatment? So
No.
in the early 1900s, he took this incredibly bold leap. I mean, really bold. He started injecting patients with low-end strains of typhoid, malaria, even smallpox.
Smallpox, wow.
To deliberately trigger strong fevers. Some of them lasted for days.
Days of intense fever. That sounds honestly terrifying. What happened? Did it work?
Well, after some truly tragic trial and error, it actually did work. Wagner Jauregg reported that 6 out of 10 syphilis patients treated with this malariotherapy, as he called it, recovered. Compare that to maybe 3 in 10 who were just left untreated.
Huge difference.
Massive. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927 for his endeavor to cure mental disease by inducing a fever. Now, thankfully, penicillin came along and made this treatment obsolete. But he really stands out, one of the only doctors to not only see fever's role, but to actually prescribe it.
Okay, but here's the really mind-blowing part, especially when you think about how you react to fevers today. Like, grab the Tylenol immediately, right? Our sources say modern science actually backs up his seemingly crazy idea. What have we learned since then?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It turns out fevers aren't just, annoying side effects. They genuinely play a crucial role in recovery. We have solid evidence now, just a 1-degree increase in body temperature that can slow the replication rate of some viruses by a factor of 200.
200, wow.
Right. And an NIH paper notes, quote, numerous investigators have identified a better outcome among patients who displayed fever. Even places like Seattle Children's Hospital tell parents, fevers turn on the body's immune system. They help the body fight infection. Normal fevers are good for sick children.
So, okay, millions of years of evolution gave us fever as this, built-in defense. Why is it then that most people, parents, patients, even doctors, drug companies, still treat fever like the enemy, something to be stamped out immediately?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of this rational versus reasonable thing. One study put it pretty bluntly. Treatment of fever is common and likely related to standard dogma rather than evidence-based practice. Howard Markle, who directs the Center for the History of Medicine, he called it fever phobia. He suggested it's more about cultural practices spreading like diseases themselves.
Huh. Culture over biology.
Essentially, yeah. Because the core reason is incredibly simple. Fevers feel awful. They hurt. And people don't want to hurt. So while it might be rational technically to want a fever if you have an infection because of the benefits, it's just not reasonable when you're shivering, miserable, and just want the pain to stop.
You just want relief.
Exactly. A doctor's goal in the real world isn't just curing the disease in a vacuum. It's curing it within what's tolerable for the actual person experiencing it. Offer someone a pill to stop the misery. That's the reasonable choice for most people.
That's such a clear example. This fever phobia really highlights that tension. It makes you wonder, where else does this conflict pop up, this rational versus reasonable? And our sources really dig into this, especially when it comes to, well, money.
Exactly. That's the big connection. This whole philosophy aiming for reasonable instead of strictly rational is something our sources argue more people should think about with their finances. Academic finance often gets obsessed with finding the mathematically perfect investment strategy, the optimal one on paper.
Right, the spreadsheet answer.
The spreadsheet answer. Precisely. But in the real world, people don't just want optimal. They want strategies they can actually live with, stick with for the long haul. And that's where reasonable often wins out.
Okay, let's connect this to a big name in finance. Harry Markowitz, Nobel laureate, pioneered modern portfolio theory, developed all these complex mathematical models back in the 50s. So you'd expect his own money was in some super complex optimized thing, right? What did he actually do?
You'd think so. But no, Markowitz's own portfolio allocation, it was a surprisingly simple 50-50 split, half bonds, half equities.
50-50. After developing portfolio theory. Why?
His reasoning wasn't based on some complex calculation. He actually said he visualized his grief. His grief if the stock market soared and he missed out, or if it crashed and he was all in.
Wow.
His goal, in his words, was to minimize his future regret.
Minimizing regret. That's fascinating. It's an emotion, not a number. What do our sources say about why that approach, even if it's not mathematically perfect, is so powerful for real people?
It's powerful because, well, minimizing future regret is really hard to quantify on a spreadsheet, isn't it? But it's incredibly easy to justify in your own life. A purely rational investor looks only at the numbers, the facts. But a reasonable investor, they factor in the human stuff, the social side, making decisions in a room with colleagues you want to impress, or maybe with a spouse you don't want to disappoint, or even competing against, your brother-in-law, or just your own nagging doubts. Those things are real, even if they aren't on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, those factors matter.
Right. As Jason Zweig put it, reflecting on Markowitz, people are neither rational nor irrational. We are human. We don't like thinking harder than we have to. Our attention is pulled everywhere. Markowitz wasn't being irrational by choosing 50-50. He was just being reasonable.
Okay, here's another example that really hammers this home. In 2008, Yale researchers published this study. They suggested young savers should supercharge their retirement accounts. How? By using 2-to-1 margin. So basically, borrowing $2 for every $1 of your own money to buy stocks. Then gradually reduce that debt as you get older.
And the math on paper looked amazing. The study showed that even if you got totally wiped out, like a 50% market crash would zero you out with 2.1 leverage, you'd still be better off long term. As long as, and this is the key part, you just picked yourself up, dusted yourself off, and started saving that same leveraged account the very next day.
The next day, after losing everything.
Exactly. The expected retirement wealth was calculated to be 90% higher this way. Purely rational, mathematically sound.
Okay, but my gut is screaming, no way. Is that reasonable? Could anyone actually do that?
You nailed it. The answer is it's almost absurdly unreasonable. Think about it. Can you imagine any normal person watching their entire retirement savings evaporate overnight and then just calmly saying, okay, time to start leveraging up again tomorrow? Absolutely not. They'd quit. They'd find a different strategy. They'd probably sue whoever told them to do it.
Right.
So the strategy might promise 90% higher expected wealth on paper, but it's, maybe 100% less reasonable for an actual human being. And this highlights something really crucial. There's actually a rational reason to prefer choices that look irrational on the surface, especially when it comes to commitment. Because few things matter more in finance than just sticking with your strategy, especially when it's going through a rough patch.
That stick-to-ittiveness, yeah, that endurance. Why is that commitment, especially during those lean years, so incredibly vital?
Because history shows the odds are just overwhelmingly stacked in your favor if you can stay in the game long enough. Look at the historical odds for U.S. markets. Making money over one day, basically 50-50, a coin toss, over 1 year, it jumps to about 68%. Over 10 years, about 88%. And over any 20-year period, so far at least, it's been 100%. So anything that helps you stay invested, helps you ride out those inevitable downturns, gives you a quantifiable edge.
Okay, so how does this translate for you, the listener? What does it mean for your choices? Take that common advice. Do what you love.
It sounds a bit, well, like empty fortune cookie wisdom, right? But if you reframe it, if you see it as the thing providing the endurance you need to let those long-term odds work for you, suddenly it becomes maybe the most important part of a financial strategy.
Think about it this way. Say you invest in some company. It looks promising on paper, but you don't really care about it. When things are going well, fine, no problem. But when the market turns, as it always does eventually, and you're losing money on something you have no connection to, it feels like a double burden.
Yeah, it's just pain. Exactly. And the easiest path, the path of least resistance, is just to sell it and move on. Cut your losses. But If you're passionate about that company, you love the mission or the product or the team or the science behind it, then the downtimes, which are still going to happen, feel different. They're blunted because you feel like you're part of something meaningful.
It gives you a reason to hang on.
Precisely. That can be the motivation you need to not give up, to stay invested, and let time work its magic.
That human connection providing the staying power, it makes sense. Where else do we see this reasonable over rational idea play out in finance?
Oh, there are several other examples where being reasonable, maybe not strictly rational, is perfectly fine. More human, really, like home bias. People tend to invest more in companies from their own country. Rationally, from a pure diversification view, that doesn't make sense.
Right, you should spread it out globally.
You should. But it becomes reasonable when you think of investing as sort of rooting for your home team. It feels comfortable, familiar. Or look at day trading or picking individual stocks. For most people, rationally, it's a losing game. The odds are stacked against you beating the market.
Definitely.
But doing it with a small amount of money, it can be reasonable if it scratches an itch. If it satisfies that urge strongly enough that you leave the rest of your serious diversified money alone. Investor Josh Brown put it perfectly about his own stock picks. He said something like, I'm not doing this because I think I'll generate alpha, outperform the market. I just love stocks. And it's my money. I get to do whatever.
Huh. That's pretty reasonable.
Totally reasonable. Even making forecasts. Most economic and market forecasts are, frankly, terrible.
Yeah, notoriously inaccurate.
But making them is still reasonable. It's hardwired into us. It's really difficult to wake up every day and truly accept you have no clue what the future holds, even though that's basically true. Now, acting heavily on those forecasts is dangerous. But the act of forecasting itself, it's human nature.
And there's one final anecdote that just perfectly ties this all together. It's about Jack Bogle, the legendary founder of Vanguard, the guy who spent his entire career championing low-cost, passive index investing, fighting against high fees. What's fascinating, maybe even a bit shocking, is that Bogle himself, the man who said high-fee funds violate the humble rules of arithmetic, he actually invested some of his own money in his son's active high-fee hedge fund.
Yeah. And his explanation to the Wall Street Journal, it pretty much sums up this whole deep dive. He just said, we do some things for family reasons. If it's not consistent, well, life isn't always consistent.
Wow, life isn't always consistent.
Exactly. Even the ultimate champion of rational, low-cost investing understood that sometimes being reasonable, being human, comes first.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you? Our deep dive today really shows that true success, whether we're talking health or wealth, often comes not from just rigidly sticking to mathematical perfection,
Right.
but from understanding and, embracing our own human nature.
Being reasonable really means crafting strategies you can actually stick with through thick and thin, because they account for your emotions, your relationships, your tolerance for discomfort, your need for meaning. It's about designing a financial plan, maybe even a life plan that you can actually live with day in and day out.
Because you're not a spreadsheet. You're a person. A wonderfully complex, sometimes irrational, hopefully reasonable person. And acknowledging that emotional reality, that might just be the most important part of making decisions that truly serve you in the long run. So maybe next time you're facing a big decision, health, money, career, whatever, ask yourself, okay, what's the purely rational choice here? And then ask, but what's the most reasonable choice for me right now in my actual life? What's a rational choice you've maybe avoided because it just didn't feel reasonable for you? Something to think about. We hope this deep dive gave you some powerful new insights to chew on. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and stay curious.